Hi, everyone. I'm Rena 9, and thank you for joining us. President Trump is denying he ever directed his former lawyer to break the law, as that lawyer is now headed to prison. This morning, the president broke his silence on his longtime confidant, Michael Cohen, who was sentenced yesterday to 3 years behind bars. In court, Cohen said time and time again he felt that it was his duty to cover Trump's dirty deeds. And in his sentencing report, prosecutors say that when Cohen paid off 2 women not to talk about alleged affairs with Donald Trump, he did so at the discretion of Trump himself. But on Twitter, the president wrote, "I never directed Michael Cohen to break the law. He was a lawyer, and he is supposed to know the law." Paula Reed has more.
Michael Cohen left federal court in New York.
Mr. Cohen, any comments?
Where inside moments earlier, Cohen learned flipping on his former boss will not spare him a 3-year sentence in federal prison for crimes including financial fraud and lying to Congress. The judge told Cohen his veritable smorgasbord of crimes were motivated by personal greed and ambition. Cohen, at times close to tears, apologized and said blind loyalty to Mr. Trump led me to choose a path of darkness over light. In August, Cohen pleaded guilty to helping candidate Trump orchestrate payouts at the height of the 2016 campaign, including one to former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal and the tabloid newspaper National Enquirer, which bought and then suppressed details of her alleged affair with Mr. Trump. Cohen recorded conversations with Mr. Trump allegedly discussing one of those payments.
No.
Prosecutors revealed yesterday they struck a deal not to charge the Enquirer's parent company, AMI, for its involvement. In exchange, AMI admitted that its principal purpose in making the payment was to suppress the woman's story, to prevent it from influencing the election. In March, McDougal said AMI approached her when it was clear Mr. Trump would win the Republican nomination.
They wanted to squash the story.
You're saying they wanted to protect Donald Trump?
I'm assuming so, yeah.
But at the White House on Wednesday, when reporters asked about Cohen, Mr. Trump ignored their questions and continued to walk out.
Mr. President, your reaction to Michael Cohen's sentencing. Is Michael Cohen...
Joining me now for more, chief correspondent for the Washington Post, Dan Balz. So, Dan, the president previously said that he didn't know about these payments, and now he says that he never directed them, never directed Cohen to break the law. Is he really digging himself into a bigger, deeper hole?
Well, I think all of the evidence that continues to accumulate puts the spotlight on him, individual one, in the legal documents. Everything we have seen, particularly from Michael Cohen and now yesterday from AMI, indicates that the president was at the center of this. Now we'll see where this goes and what the Southern District of New York and/or the Mueller team end up doing about the president. But there's no question he appears to be in legal jeopardy, given the people around him who have pleaded guilty to things.
You know, Dan, President Trump says that he didn't break any campaign finance laws. He also blames Cohen for making what he calls was the mistake. Does that contradict the statements of each other there in that?
Well, I mean, he's contradicted himself repeatedly on this, as you indicated. I mean, the first time he was asked about the payments, he said he didn't know anything about them. Then he's acknowledged that he knew about them, but he didn't think they were illegal. And now he's saying that, well, I didn't direct Michael Cohen to break the law. I believe that if you are involved in a crime like that, if you have broken the law, it's not simply the lawyer who is in jeopardy. It's the person who asked for it to be done. If there is corroborating evidence on what Michael Cohen has said, that puts the president in the legal crosshairs of the prosecutors. Again, you know, there's a question of whether he could be indicted as president. There's a legal opinion from the Justice Department that says no. It's difficult to imagine that this Justice Department would ever sign off on an indictment of the president. But as we know, when the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives in January, there will be there already is talk of impeachment and the possibility of those proceedings beginning sometime early in the new year. So for the president, this is a very perilous time.
And Dan, we know that the publisher of the National Enquirer actually admitted that it did make these hush money payments to the woman, you know, to ensure that she didn't damage candidate Trump before the election. What do you think, Dan, it means for the president?
Well, I think that the president is increasingly isolated here as a number of people with whom he has been very, very close over a long period of time are pleading guilty to crimes. And the other person who was not mentioned in this is Alan Weisselberg, the longtime financial person at the Trump Organization, who was given immunity from prosecution. We have not yet heard exactly what all of that has turned up, but that should be tremendously worrying to the President of the United States at this point. So I think if you're in his position right now, you look around and you see, in a sense, things closing in on you, and he is doing what he often does, which is he is both lashing out, trying to, in a sense, move the goalposts as to what was known or what wasn't known, or what he did or what he didn't do. But at the same time, there are a number of forces, both political and legal, that have him right in the spotlight.
So, Dan, I want to ask you also about Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, who's managed to secure enough votes, it appears, to again become Speaker. But there's this term limit deal. You recently raised questions about who will speak for the Democrats and what will this person have to say. And you said that the challenge will be producing someone whose voice rises above the others. Is Nancy Pelosi that right person, and should there be term limits?
Well, she will be the person, at least temporarily, as we go into the new year. I mean, she is going to be the highest ranking Democrat on the national scene and someone with a real platform from which to speak. But as we move into the presidential cycle, ultimately a party is defined by its presidential nominee, not by its congressional leadership. So there will be a transition period in which we will be looking at all of the people who decide to run for president. And the question I was trying to pose in that is there somebody in that group ultimately who can, in a sense, stitch together a fractured coalition, a coalition that's fissured, that has different views on what it will take to win the presidency, that has different constituencies with different demands, and for the people running for president, some of whom think this is kind of an easy bridge that they can make. I think they're going to find that it's more difficult than that. I would add one other thing about Nancy Pelosi, and that is, the president likes to think of himself as a deal maker, but I think that the country has seen a real deal maker in action over the last month or so since the Democrats took over the House. Nancy Pelosi has made a series of deals with people in order to secure the vote she needs to become Speaker in January. I think it is testament to both her political savvy, her experience, her toughness, and also the degree to which there was really not a clear and viable alternative to her. Because she has decided to say, I will serve no more than 2020 or 2022, I don't think that ultimately is a huge concession on her part.
Dan, is there someone else that you believe in the Democratic Party could be someone like Nancy Pelosi who can deliver on getting those votes, but might be a new, fresher face?
Well, I don't think that there was anybody in the House hierarchy who would have been able to do what she was able to do, which is to secure enough votes. There were people who didn't want to see her as Speaker come January, but they did not have a good alternative who could take her on and defeat her. So I think within the House, she stands taller than all of the rest at this point. But as I say, at some point, the Democrats will have to choose somebody to go up against President Trump, assuming he runs for re-election. And I think that's the bigger and more challenging task ahead for the Democrats.
It certainly is, and what a crowded field it's already turned out to be. Dan, I want to ask you about lawmakers who are struggling to reach the spending deal to keep the government open. Here's what Nancy Pelosi had to say today.
Let's talk about what we can do right now to keep government open. There is strong bipartisan support to do that. The only obstacle is the President of the United States.
So the president is now tweeting how the wall will pay for itself. Is that true? And does that get them closer to reaching some sort of a deal on this?
Well, no, it's not true. I mean, he's basically doing, kind of phony mathematics to claim that savings produced by the replacement for NAFTA, which frankly has not yet been approved by Congress and must be, but he's claiming that there are savings in that agreement, which ultimately mean that Mexico is paying for the wall. It's an argument that no serious person is going to take seriously. So that's not true. He is an obstacle at this point, but the question is, will, in the end, they find a way to keep the government open? I think based on past history, you would have to say yes. Perhaps there would be a very short-term closure of the government, but one that many people probably would not feel. There would not necessarily be a huge impact. If that turns out not to be the case and it's a protracted one, then that's a different story. But again, apportioning blame, I mean, the Republicans shut down the government at one point a few years ago and didn't pay a real price at all in the 2014 midterms. The Democrats were blamed for the very short shutdown that took place earlier this year, and they managed to win the House pretty handily in 2018. So apportioning blame is one thing that happens in Washington. I think voters look at this with a little more of a jaundiced eye.
Dan, before you go, I want to ask you sort of big picture here. You wrote that instability appears to be the order of the day, whether in the United States or in Europe. Why are you saying that, and do you believe that this will stabilize?
Well, I don't know that it will stabilize, in part because I think that we're in a different era, and part of what's going on is globally is a response to 20 or 30 years of globalization, and what we have found is that while there are winners from globalization, there are also people who are losers, and they have not been adequately taken care of. There is a debate internationally, country by country, over national identity. We're seeing it in Britain. We've seen it in France and elsewhere. We've seen it here in 2016. It was part of the 2016 campaign that the president ran. So we are at a moment in which kind of the traditional structures that have kind of kept the world together and kept countries bound together have broken apart to some extent. And until there is a clear sense of what that future looks like, I think we're going to be in for a period like that.
Dan Balz with the Washington Post. Dan, always grateful you could join us.
Thank you, Rena.